Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm the President CEO at the BIZTEK organization, which is Business and Technology Professional Associations of Canada. And we are in education, awareness, certification, thought leadership. And I think you're in for a treat today because we have a very special person here with us today. And he also happens to be one of the founding Thinkubators. And I will explain later what that is all about, which is a really tremendous thing. So the person I'm talking about, as you see on your screen, is Peter Schwartz, who is an accomplished Canadian technology entrepreneur. He was previously the chairman, CEO of Descartes Systems, a $6 billion kind of global logistic technology company with customers in 160 countries. And that, he took public in 1998. So Peter is also one of the founders of the Kognitiv Canada's preeminent technology hub. When you think about that, that's quite amazing. Kognitiv serves as a budding ecosystem for the commercialization of innovation technologies and a model for startup notable incubation in Canada. Now, since leaving Descartes kind of group, Peter has founded Lawrence Capital, which has made 30 portfolio investments in 17 different technologies and some Canadian leading entrepreneurs and breakthrough companies. He's presently the founder and executive chairman of Kognitiv Corporation, which recently completed a successful acquisition of EMEA Loyalty, which you know from Aeromiles, Aeroplan, and also and Shoppers Solutions, former units of EMEA. A founding member at YPO Great Lakes, and Peter was also kind of resides in Waterloo region. He was one of the youngest kind of recipients of the Financial Post's Top 40 award, under 40 award. So that is actually quite amazing. When you look at the people in there, it's pretty impressive. Now, we are actually very excited because, as I said, Peter is thinking about it. This is a recognition of people who have really done consistently exceptional through the community, for the country, for the company, for employees. And Peter is not one of the people who actually takes the stuff and, then keeps going. He's the founding person. So you can see that everybody only sees problems. He doesn't just see problems, he sees opportunities, and he actually goes and gets it done. So there's a very big difference. So Peter, very good morning to you today.
Well, thank you so much, Bashir, and and for that warm introduction. I hope I can live up to the list of things that you put out there. But it really is a pleasure to be here. Your organization brings something very much needed to the Canadian, political, economic, socio environment that, as we know, has been shocked this year into an unprecedented level of change, and you can't use any other word than that to describe what's happening. That said, I think a lot of what's old is new again, and I think we might just be able to see through this difficult and challenging time some innovation that might have taken many more years to set in. So having spent my career addressing, however I could possibly address some of the core root challenges, as you said, we really are at an interesting time in the development of our economy, and we thank you and your organization for taking a lead role in engaging many very capable people who have a desire to help any way they can, and certainly that is how I've taken this on, being blessed to have been around so many innovators, making so many mistakes, and also having the benefit of having a few things work out well because we stayed the course. So you've done the same. Starting something new as you've done is not easy, and you got to stay with it. And we appreciate what you're doing here in Canada for all of us.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate that. So today's theme then, because of what Peter just outlined, which is brilliant and sets the stage, we're going to be talking about collaboration, because without that, we're going to be in trouble with all the challenges that Peter just talked about. So let me start with the first question then. You have, over the period of time at Kognitiv, you have built and done collaboration. So what's the overview when you're looking? What do you think is the problem we're trying to solve for Canada, globally, locally?
Well, I think at the heart of it, before we talk about what collaboration is and how we think about that, it's something that has been around since the beginning of time, and really over the last 10 years, I think we've taken a big step back on collaboration, what it means, and what it can mean for everyone. And by that, I would say we are faced today with what we would call a collaboration gap. Whether that is between government and business, and we see some of that certainly today. We want to be helpful. We want to support our government. We want to make sure they have access to business for whatever we can do to give them our perspectives, good and bad. But we also have a collaboration gap between business and consumers. And I think now that we've seen over the last 10 years what it is consumers expect of businesses, we can address that gap with technology and also business models that are designed to be collaborative.
That's fantastic. And you now, when it comes to collaboration, and you've done quite a bit of this. Why is it so important? You answered part of it already, but why is it so important, and where do we go? I mean, in fact, you talk about this quite frequently, right?
Yeah. Well, I was trained in the very beginning on the principles of operations research, yield management, as it's often called. How can FedEx get a package around the world for $24? And that is rooted in collaboration. If you were to just look at the economics that Fred Smith set out to achieve in the beginning, and what had to come together to make that work, whether that was buying his or building his own telco to get the service reliability he needed, or using somebody else's truck or plane or depot or warehouse, things that we don't necessarily see as consumers, we just know what the end product is. That is now, on hyperdrive. When you look at the trend toward collaboration, it's rooted in direct to consumer, as we've seen certainly during the pandemic, and for the years before with what Amazon has created in terms of the table stakes. Hyper-personalization. As we move into this next era, we'll see more and more hyper-personalization opportunities brought on by collaborative technology. The ability to know what's going on here and there. But we also have this subscription economy that is emerging. Professor Scott Galloway calls it rundles, one of the trends that we see. And subscription. The subscription economy really is a benchmark for all of us, because it says there is long-term value there. You're not going to pay an annual fee for something unless you're receiving either an essential service that you can't get anywhere else, which may not be consumer friendly, or all the way over on the other hand, you vote with your money as a consumer and you will be loyal and pay for things in advance, versus what we've seen over the last 10 years, which is this real focus on transactions and instant gratification, and all of the platforms that surround us today, largely all of the platforms, are focused on that one thing. And of course, their business models, if you tear them apart, really aren't economically feasible. For them to be economically feasible, especially when they're free, we've talked often about the cost of free. Well, that's showing up in how they do subsidize their business models with ads and advertising. I'm not against ads or advertising, but I certainly wouldn't build a world-class mission-critical distribution network on something that followed the data and principles of advertising. For one, I would want to know where that truck is, where that warehouse is, and I would have to be agile. So if you start with what the consumer table stakes are, I want it now, I want it the way I want it, right? And I want to be loyal to it from the standpoint of making sure that that continues to perform to the level I wish and has some value associated with it that makes me stay committed to one company versus another. With all of that, imagine being a C-level executive today faced with those challenges and the table stakes that have been set by whether it's social media networks for communication or it's Amazon for product delivery. Think about that for a moment. The economic and the carbon footprint that is created and that is consolidated to just a handful of companies, both as the number one polluters, if you will, and the number one aggregators of our own consumer data. Professor Scott Galloway talked about how we've traded privacy now instead of time, for the value that we receive. Consumers don't think much about that, but from a business standpoint, if there are hundreds of thousands of cars and trucks crisscrossing each other to get you a single-use delivery, is that really necessary? The pandemic taught us that pickup really is a thing. If you study traffic patterns, and we drive right by those grocery stores, Amazon, with their model, competing now with the emerging model, which is a collaborative model between Shopify and Walmart. Walmart converting, up to 70% of their stores into depots for pickup, for return, which is actually a very profitable part of the logistics environment that we live in. But we're driving right on by. Do we actually have to race the delivery vehicle home to arrive to get there before the package arrives so that it's not stolen off your porch? These are all inefficiencies that are masked over by the ad-supported models that grace the massive platforms of today. Our view is to take a look at, if you were to fly overhead with X-ray glasses and look down, over the countryside and the cities, you would see significant excess capacity sitting available, like those retail stores. If people are going to shop from home, then we need fewer places to go and shop. It's just simple economics. And operations research would tell you that if you can create an efficient network and compete based on those efficiencies, you can offer an alternative to the de facto or default standard that Amazon will control everything. Listen, I wouldn't bet against Jeff Bezos or any of what's ahead for him. It's not about that. It's about saying we have lots of alternatives. Shopify has taken, a sector of the market that to me is very important, which is supporting small business and the value-added component of retail. That doesn't fit well into Amazon's model. It's too complicated. Commodities shipped overnight that you can return 50+% of the time is really their core business. And if it doesn't work out for them, they can generate some ad dollars. But if you look at the core operations research principles of distributional logistics and now extend that to hyper-personalization, direct-to-consumer, this idea of being committed in a subscription economy over time, and companies working together to provide you for one monthly fee, a value proposition that is superior, but that they make their money over time on, not by capturing your data, but by creating what we call now zero-party data. So part of the way we will close that collaboration gap is by involving consumers, not just in the table stakes that they've told us are there and that certain businesses have delivered toward, but to what goes on behind the scenes. How can we take our excess capacity? How can we take collaboration and make it work for us? I'll just finish by saying, if you're one of those C-level executives, that what you need to do today, really coming out of all the research that we're seeing emerge and many great think tanks that that are out there that you can participate in, and the wealth of data that exists on the web where we can learn about these things, they need to do two things. They need to create a safe environment within their ecosystem in order to collaborate. This is an important thing, whether it's data privacy or it's data security. We have a need to create those safe environments. Banks have one already, for example. So we would call that unearthed value. Our bank clients, even our larger retailers, have secure, safe environments. Consumers don't really value those today, but it's important for the business in order to collaborate to have that. We, for example, have focused on that part of our platform, the ability for them to use the platform together with others that use the platform to create those safe environments where they can collaborate. And then equally, when you look at the other thing they need to do, share data. Sometimes they're sensitive data, sometimes they're most sensitive data, and sometimes with their own competitors. FedEx could use a UPS truck behind a depot where you didn't see it if it made for a better value proposition for the consumer, and it really wouldn't matter. We don't need to see a logo when it's going behind a warehouse to a air cargo depot. So those two trends, having to create a safe environment, having to share your data, give rise to the need for technology to be collaborative, not a big black box where your data goes away and you don't see it except for either the benefit of selling it for advertising purposes or monetizing it. Here we're using that data and creating new data, zero-party data, that allows C-level executives to do those two things well.
This is actually fantastic because now, as you mentioned, that something came to mind that I had been talking about differently, but having that approach that you just talked about, collaboration, we've outsourced, the banks have outsourced quite a lot of stuff all over the place. Using exactly what you just said in terms of collaboration, we could actually, and that's where the government can play a big role as well. So, and my question would be, then if you take government, like basically collaboration, now that we've talked about that, it requires obviously a much deeper, richer kind of collaboration between the government, technology leaders, business leaders to achieve, and you can drill down on this one. But one of the quick questions would be, like the banks have outsourced all over the place because of what you just said around the data. Collaboration could actually be, if you're doing credit cards, let's say each bank is doing, why could they not use a data center to work together? So you got the raised floor, you got people keeping the lights on, all sorts of different things instead of running 7 data centers. What is unique is what you deliver in your customer service, right? Running, right?
Absolutely. I mean, take that same analogy and say, if Target and Walmart had warehouses beside one another, why couldn't they share a snowplow here in Canada? Why do they have to have 2 contracts? These are opportunities for efficiencies first and foremost. And within whatever the spectrum of privacy and data security is that your business wishes to build its value proposition on, the banks as our custodian, we need to trust them with our money. And on that basis, if they could find ways to create efficiencies so they could invest more in the kinds of things that consumers are demanding on the front end of the process, we'd really get somewhere. And I think giving them the technology and the safe environment to be able to share that data with some of those natural trading partners that they have. Think about, unique IDs. Listen, I don't have a problem with brokers, but brokerage models are clearly in structural design. And yet you have really a lot of what we call dark brokers operating today: home delivery, food delivery, the ride sharing economy. Really, if you just scrape away just a couple of layers, you'll see quickly they're charging a significant brokerage fee and of the top line revenue of the company they're providing that service to. And that's because those companies are in front of the line in terms of reaching consumers and gathering their data, and really for their own benefit. So even if it is first party data and you're handing it over to whoever that platform provider is, right, you don't have a say in what happens with that data after. Now, they've provided a service that's valuable to you, but in behind are a tremendous number of inefficiencies. Those efficiencies can be solved by the things that you pointed out, right? Sharing a raised floor environment or so on. But think just about the basic food and shelter layer here of your own ID, your own identity, right? Brokers have created the brand or facade, really, that they're giving something to you more than just the thing that you're consuming at that moment, right? They don't need to go much beyond that. The consumer really doesn't know what happens with their data, but the consumer also hasn't been connected logically between the various things they consume, the goods and services they consume, the currencies they have access to at the bank, points programs, etc. Think about it. This is Peter Schwartz here, and that is Peter Schwartz there. It's not this, as brokers would call them, closed user group that they control and extract fees to provide a service that particular business wasn't agile enough to provide on their own. So if we give them the ability to match those table stakes of what the consumer expects around hyper-personalization, direct-to-consumer, the notion behind customer lifetime value that is inherent in somebody subscribing to something over time versus being alone on the World Wide Web, as they would say, looking for the thing they're trying to locate, or having their value extracted. So if we could give 2 companies, a bank and someone else, a bank being regulated can't share your identity with anyone else, but there are many businesses that have trouble reaching consumers directly who could share identities with that consumer's permission. And that is the basis of zero-party data. When you look at the definition of zero-party data and how it differs from first-party data, it's exactly those 2 things. One, I know that what I'm doing with you is safe. You are the bank, and this trading partner, for example, is identifying that it is that Peter Schwartz. And if they have the same Peter Schwartz, we can now do things for Peter Schwartz that match the table stakes that are in the market. Equally, I know the value I'm going to receive for giving up that data. So I would give my first party data up to the bank. It would be zero party data if in fact the bank said by now acknowledging that it is the same Peter Schwartz, not two closed user groups, two black boxes that have a business deal between them, but they're extracting the identification of me and presenting to me that that identification is both safe and worth something to me. That really is a foundational principle for where we're headed. And the consumer must opt in. GDPR and all of the other emerging standards, even what will happen with Section 230 will be profound around this particular concept. So I think we're going to see a real quick and rapid shift. And the pandemic brought a lot of that on. We now know we need to raise the bar as businesses on what standard we provide to the consumer. But if we're a bank, we still can't compromise the principles of regulation and data privacy that are underpinning the value proposition we offer in the market.
That's quite insightful. And there's something very powerful in what you said just now, is because if we take that approach, what you just talked about and how the banks and others can play a role, you also improve security, or as everybody wants to call it, cybersecurity, because you have less points of exposure, your behavior is better known, and if there's anything, any anomaly coming up, it'll get picked up by all the people now sharing, as opposed to you hacking somebody and then hacking somebody else, and you do it 5 times before people realize what's happened. In the model you just described, you improve security by like a phenomenal level, right? Because the data is not floating all over the place, and people who are doing it are actually taking care of it because you know they are a trusted entity, right?
Absolutely. And for example, our model and a good B2B technology model for the future, one we've subscribed to all of our lives, or we wouldn't have been able to do what we did at Descartes, is that we don't own the data. Our clients own the data. They decide where to share it. Our job is to show them where there's value to do that. So resolving a unique ID, from a data security, data privacy standpoint is profound, but it's also table stakes. If you're a regulated entity, for example.
Right.
Equally, the marketers will go wild because our clients now have the opportunity to take that unique ID and deliver to you what it is you want much better, including data privacy, data security built in. Equally, if we know that's the Peter Schwartz here and the Peter Schwartz there, then those two trading partners can co-brand or co-market and say, find me others like Peter Schwartz, because I already know he frequents you, he frequents me. Now, how is it we can relate that to others within our own ecosystem that may wish to achieve or arrive at that same level of benefit that Peter's now getting because we've identified him. If your business model is to extract brokerage fees, your business model is to, farm your black box, if you will, whether it's for advertising purposes or you're charging a brokerage fee, or in many cases, both, right? Your business model, can't survive or will be fundamentally disrupted by this form of collaboration. And, Shopify, for example, has epitomized that, much like, our philosophy here at Kognitiv, or the one that we had at Descartes, or frankly, the ones that I invested in, at Lawrence Capital leading up to founding Kognitiv, all take that same approach. We consider that to be table stakes. We're here to provide technology and now a business model that can allow them to do things that would otherwise be impossible in terms of meeting those table stakes. What Shopify did was a lot less about retail technology. And you could imagine in their early investor presentations, investors want you to relate what you're doing, to something they already understand. That's very important for them to see what it is that you're up against. Equally, the very best stories in the world, the ones that are transformative, are ones that create new ways of doing things. In our case, we don't think it's new to say that's Peter and that's Peter. We just think that that's missing and it needs to be there. So I think as we move forward, we start to learn that, well, it looked like retail technology, and you would have your big map of all the retail technology solutions, and Shopify would have had to answer to the table stakes. And they did. You get a lot of technology when you license Shopify. Yet we know they were focused on credit, trade credit, something very difficult to come by for small retailers. Logistics, meeting the table stakes that Jeff Bezos has set and that consumers love. I would say they've overcorrected. We don't need everything. We don't need 200 CPG products dropped on our porch from 200 different companies all at the same time. That in itself is a form of collaboration that is addressed by powerful logistics companies around the world that understand, how to optimize supply chains with technology, people, and service offerings. But I think that's where we're going to see massive change as a result of the pandemic. Those efficiencies, those inefficiencies coming together, really starting with data privacy and linking to data privacy powerful businesses that are all about data privacy and that want to take that to the next level and connect it up with the consumer table stakes we now know we have to deliver to as businesses in this century.
That's fantastic. As you have kind of alluded to, or even said, that it's exposed all these inefficiencies the coronavirus did. It didn't create, but it certainly exposed it, amplified it. The model you talked about would help them get much closer to the customer and understand what they really want at all times and be able to pivot, which they are unable to do today because they don't know what the guys really want, right? It's a major problem, and then they wonder what happened. The other part in what you just talked about also in the collaboration, you just actually said it's security by design, because when you went to this, how you would do it, it automatically you're designing it because when you're working with all these guys. So that brings us to because you've really laid the foundation extremely well. We are at a very interesting point in Canada with all the inefficiencies, the type of challenges we have. If you really look at even the fact that we attracted talent here to Canada, some of them came by default, not design, because they couldn't go next door because things were very difficult for them. Now we have a potential to do something really good if we were to play it right. So the foundational impact of this businesses to Canada, to Canadians, and as I mentioned, the new Biden administration will obviously have a much more progressive approach than we've seen up to now on immigration. Combine that with the Canadian government initiative on revamping our data and legislation, and then you start going down that path. As a Canadian government, the business leader, tech leader, what do you do to address this thing and be successful? You already laid out some very interesting foundational stuff. How would you bring that part together now? Or what should be done?
Well, that's the big question of the day. Right. I would again refer to the collaboration gap. I hope they're only just getting started, with what we've seen, here in Canada over the last week. There's definitely a focus on data privacy. I commend our government for saying this is an issue for us to address. And certainly with Joe Biden probably taking a very, very different approach to immigration that, we saw under the current or previous administration. I think there are some profound challenges that exist on both sides of the border. And what we should not do before we talk about what some of the opportunities might be, right, and how we can get together here, what we should not do is rush down the road, before we've really done a good job of analyzing the root cause and also what the long-term, to be destination is. Immigration is a great example. We grew up here in Canada. We grew up in the United Nations, effectively. What a tremendous experience for Canadians, having two languages, whether you speak them both or not. And I would encourage everybody, to learn another language in their lives if they have the ability to do so. It just creates all sorts of empathy, all sorts of context that you wouldn't otherwise have, right? And especially here in Western economies, where we, tend to see things a little differently than economies that came thousands of years before us back to the spice route. Everything is rooted in respect and value. And I think when you talk about immigration and sort of the little boom we've had in Canada because of the administration in the US, I'm certainly not going to build my business relying on that continuing. Even if, the administration that was there before continued on for another term, I would still not make any long-term plans. I wouldn't change anything about my long-term plans. Diversity and inclusion is a very important thing. It's on the increase in terms of its importance, not just for the obvious things we read about online, but because practically tapping the skills, knowledge, and experiences of cultures around the world, right? Diverse views to a problem, to analyze and get to the right place, and to never summarize before your time means having a broad enough perspective to solve the problem. Immigration's a big deal. In fact, you go back far enough in this country, no one's from here, I think, depending on what you believe, but I think that's important. So just like with the pandemic, people are rushing out of the city. What is happening to real estate prices in the suburban areas? They're going up. What's happening in major centers? The prices are going down. When that gap narrows, markets are efficient. What'll happen? Did I leave because I was afraid? Did I leave because prices were cheaper? Well, once those things level out, that's a short-term situation. We have to let markets find an equilibrium. This issue of data privacy is rooted in the last 10 years of what Section 230 afforded a handful of very powerful companies who have set, on one hand, arguably, one of the best consumer value standards we've ever seen, but underneath the waterline are structural imbalances, ones that I referred to earlier on that we need to address. Our governments need to be focused long-term. And that means collaborating with business. Really, Michael Sabinas, Bruce Croxton, John Ruffalo, some of the folks who have taught us so much about, what we're lacking here in Canada and to be competitive around the world, but more broadly, what is happening with data privacy and how all of them have been, really net givers to Canada in helping us understand better with their own experiences, their own abilities. And, we want to see government engage business much more than they have been. And like I said, it's on the right path to see Section 230 make it, out into the public for what it is, I think is a big step forward for what was announced here in Canada, promising to say we're concerned about these things, but equally where we have seen little attempts at collaboration, maybe the superclusters. I haven't heard anything about superclusters since they were announced, really. What were they designed to do? They were designed to allow more collaboration. We need to stay focused on that. We need to see businesses and government come together. They need to engage, business people that have experiences with these things that can help guide them a little bit better than I think they've been guided just over this last couple of years.
I think supercluster may be a result of something you just said, don't summarize before time, which means understand the problem. Then you get the investment done because you're addressing the right issues. If you go too early, you put the money in the wrong place. Although your heart is in the right place, your intent is good, you don't end up with so that is actually very true. On the only thing that is bothersome on the Section 230, if everything was to go through, is that if somebody was to put bad stuff on the social media, Facebook, whatever, they have zero responsibility because they would be exempt, right? As the carrier, which is not a good thing, but hopefully that will get addressed or should get addressed. That said, I think the one of, and you touched some fantastic, I hope people, when they hear all this thing back, sit down and hear, because Peter's put some amazing stuff out there. So we have the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is, of course, the COVID. And one of the lessons that you've already, again, talked briefly about problems that were either exposed or amplified. You have built businesses in for many years and done some amazing stuff. How are you personally then at Kognitiv dealing with this? Then what opportunities do you see for yourself, for Canada? Because you as I said, it's not a question of theory, you're doing it.
Well, thanks. I mean, we're trying hard. I think one thing that we all have to realize, some of the greatest business models out there today and looking back and looking forward will be a combination of technology and people. I think that's really important. This whole idea that machines can do everything is obviously a significant risk, an issue for us to address. I would say our generation needs to focus very much on creating good jobs, sustainable jobs, call it gig 2.0, if we can use that old convention of 2.0. Terribly important, and showing how home-based workers now more so than ever can engage in that service level value proposition that technology can never solve. We're seeing, for example, during the pandemic, terrible circumstances for many hardworking people who just 12 months ago had a job and a paycheck, who don't have one today. And yet those skills are transferable if there wasn't this perception or actual barrier to their ability to engage today's technology to do these things. So if you're at a bank and you were redeeming your points, for example, for a trip that was canceled, that can't just be a machine. And well, it might have been fun to click around and see pictures and put on your AR experience or whatever it is that we're going to head to in the future. Real people are on the phone dealing with that situation. Equally, somebody that's lost their job, right? That needs support, that needs help, coping with the situation. Well, we have some very interesting technology that can help with diagnostics and triage and so on, all creating efficiencies for business, and therefore they will continue to be embraced. Can't fall short of human interaction, not entirely. We're not all going to marry robots. Some of us may, but definitely leading up to that point, we have an opportunity to combine those two things. Part of how we do that with our technology is very quickly, with a simple subscription fee, give our customers, and they are B2B, purely B2B, the ability to create that safe environment for collaboration, the ability to share data like the IDs and the zero-party data examples I gave earlier, and those being the table stakes for businesses to create the opportunity to describe to consumers how it is they will meet the table stakes, but also take it one step further. Zappos was a great experience. God rest his soul. Tony had all sorts of things to say about the importance of customer service at a time when everybody was talking about eliminating those low-paid call center jobs. He took it for, the person on the telephone or on whatever device you're using today is the person that, matters almost more than anything, when that person is needed. And I think we're going to see some fundamental understanding of that as this gig economy goes from some of the questionable tactics that we've seen with perhaps some questionable actors on how they have rounded up excess capacity in your vehicle to provide home delivery. Those models are not sustainable. I mean, maybe they can support them with ads, but they're also, taking, a statistic that not a lot of people have focused on. Only 4%, and I won't name the company, but one of the massive ride-sharing companies in the world has only 4% retention of their delivery personnel 1 year after they start. And a lot of that is just pure plain deception about, what the all-in cost of providing that delivery service is. But if consumers want it, that demand will continue on. So we have to make sure with our technology, and our philosophy is this idea of a distributed web, the idea, decentralized web, a distributed ledger, the ability for every individual client to have the technology and the business model to collaborate, to connect together when they need to share information that needs to be shared for the benefit of consumers, and of course, as businesses, for the benefit of their own profitability. And when you put those two things together, it really is green field today. When people have those table stakes to work with when they go to their job at a bank, right? Some jobs won't be here in 5 years because they will simply be automated, maybe sooner. Other jobs, will step up in terms of their importance. Even marketers, when you look at what's happened with the destruction of agencies in favor of Facebook marketing. We saw last summer, many large corporations boycott Facebook, didn't make a dent really in their marketing efforts. And some of those displaced ad agency personnel or people working in middle management jobs in large corporations can come back now because they have, troves of data and new data like zero-party data that they can work with, where they can get ahead of it. When they're on the telephone, they can get at things that don't require going through 2 or 3 different systems, where they may not even be able to access that data because that particular place that has locked up the data, lives and breathes on monetizing that data as opposed to providing it for its purpose. So I think we're going to see this come together. Home-based workers now, accelerated by the pandemic. Some of the efficiencies we see around pickup versus everything being delivery are being realized. The access to the technology that now smaller retailers have with Shopify, allowing them to meet the table stakes for logistics and for credit, and distributed shopping for that matter, will revolutionize and bring on a whole another level of value for those businesses and value add for the consumers of those businesses. But equally, it will spawn a whole new generation of small, mid-enterprise entrepreneurs who can now succeed, and home-based workers, in some cases, higher paid middle management jobs that have been displaced that can come back because we have this new ecosystem of people collaborating, sharing data, and introducing a whole another level of service that we as consumers demand now by what we've been exposed to over the last 10 years.
Oh, that's actually, it's very interesting, because you have also identified one of the challenges that we have, that businesses and tech leaders, government can play a role in, is because we have skills gaps now because of the speed of technology changes. There are skills gaps, and one of the things that's missing is the soft skills. And you don't see university or colleges or anybody teaching them, right? So business could help here. But the other important part you shared, which I actually, to be honest with you, didn't realize till when I actually asked this question in the ride sharing, and was horrified to find out how much that driver actually got paid, right?
Yeah.
And the amount of cut that people were taking in the middle, including the ride sharing, and I go, this is ridiculous. Why am I using this? So I felt really guilty and gave these guys additional money. But the point is that I think if people start putting themselves in those roles and saying, how would it mean to me if it could help? But I think you picked a very, very interesting area. And I'm going to digress just for a second, before I forget, because you said something important before we started this conversation, is that we were, Peter brought it up, and I feel very strongly the same way, is that we're missing our colleague, John Ruffalo, right? Who Peter said would be fantastic to have him here, as people who know him or viewed some of the stuff we've done in the past would realize there's been an important part of even our setup, and he's also thinking better. So he's going through rehab. Our thoughts and prayers, and certainly I'm expressing what Peter said just a few minutes earlier, are with him. And so hopefully, John, you'll get back on your feet, kicking and ready to get involved with us. We're looking forward to that. Now, very interesting, Peter, where we are there. Not only there are a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of potential opportunities that you've talked about, right? This probably, in the fancy, that might be most likely will be the last session, at least of this type anyway, before the end of the year. And we are kind of getting to a Christmas holiday season, because I think people are going to lay down the tools very soon, even if not officially, certainly unofficially in many companies. What would your message be to help Canadians move forward, to Canadians, the workers, the businesses, the government? If you were to go broader and take whatever time you need to, because it's a broad, open-ended stuff, what advice would you give them? What would you share with them from a vision, from what they need to do, how they can bring things? Because there is some very good potential opportunities here that you have talked about too, right? Not just the problem. So.
Well, yeah, certainly this is the time of the year when we all think more about those things. And in this year, more so than at any time in my life, I would say. It doesn't matter what crisis we experienced as we, went through the years. This one is one that we really do need to stop and think about very carefully. How can we be helpful? And if you have the ability to help, whether it's your financial resources or the time that you have available, and both equally important. We do so. And I think you asked in our last interview, and thanks for those words about John. We are most certainly thinking about him. I'm trying to carry as much of today's agenda, as John would, around some of these things, having been tireless around, collaboration between business and government, and recognizing some of what was happening, between Canada and the US, and really Canada and around the world now, as we see a lot of those other challenges set in with, what's happening in various powerful economies of the world, and how we, really do need to find a way to build bridges, lots of bridges. But I would say in our last meeting, you talked about what shape of recovery you think we'll see coming out of the pandemic.
Right.
And I think we also know that we are going to see some permanent change. And I think the idea that we have a new normal, as we hear people say, change is really the new normal. I mean, things are going to be unpredictable for a while. The bar has been raised. It's very difficult for people to comprehend, even in good times, the rate of change that we're experiencing. So if you have if you have that in your DNA, if you have first principles thinking drilled into your head, there's a lot you can do right now to speak up. Even if you don't know what to do, share your concerns, speak to people. There's that collaboration thing again. Get on the phone if you know somebody who's struggling, be there for them. But back on the shape of the recovery, I think what we need to do, certainly in many conversations over the last couple of months, it's come up, what shape of recovery will we see? I think we all have to work very, very diligently to ensure we do not have the so-called K-style recovery. It's very clear at this point, the pandemic has exposed what was already a massive problem of inequality, and the mass consolidation of data. And I wish I remember who said it. Data is the new real estate, if you will. Before it was data is the new oil. In any event, the mass consolidation of data and how that data is being used, whether that's to threaten democracy, or that is to make businesses inefficient so they can't provide the table stakes you need as a consumer. Well, you also need to have the protection, for example, that a bank gives you or a government. So to avoid a K-shaped recovery, I hope to see lots of and participate in lots of conversations over the next weeks around what we can do about that. What sorts of ideas exist that our governments will pay attention to? Healthcare, certainly wealth consolidation. These are all real issues. But a K-style recovery means that only a handful of people will benefit, and that so many people will be marginalized, and I think, with that, we must do better. And we believe collaboration is at the center of that, whether that's business and government collaborating, something I'm very passionate about, but also businesses and consumers, and not the way we've seen, 4% retention 1 year later, is leaving a clue. Did you add up what the cost of putting all that mileage on your vehicle really was? Did they change the pricing rules on you once they'd reached enough critical mass in a small African country that those who signed on last year could actually survive to stay on next year? And what is it doing to mental health, really, when you believed in something and then you were let down? Let's not call it deception, but in many cases it is.
Okay.
And we need to clamp down on that. I think, we need to hold these organizations accountable. We also have to connect with them to the extent that if you can't beat them, you got to join them. Consumers are now in, very big networks where those platforms, are difficult to disconnect from. Those ever available, tempting, buttons that show up on your front doorstep when you're driving right by, or the pesky license button, as we call it, that consumers click through so they can get their next tweet out. I think we need to pay attention, and we need to band together, whether it's business people who are aware of these issues or government that have to hold them accountable. Section 230 is a perfect example. I mean, if you think about, how that was rooted, those of us who watched it happen thought, gee, that's super lobbying. If you get to the absolute top of lobbying at its worst, it's there. I mean, giving broad legal immunity for interactive, technology, and for user-generated content, while allowing them to moderate the content without fear of taking on liability. I forget where I read that. It might have been Wired. It might have been Professor Scott Galloway, or it could have been Kara Swisher. But one of them said something like this. It was a blanket statement just before the last set of hearings. And I've written a number of posts over the last few years on this very issue. But I do think that that should be the big topic of conversation for people who are aware of these things, efforts to make the government more aware and to make those companies that are perhaps on the wrong side of data privacy, on the wrong side of even, consumer value propositions. It's not what it seems. Home food delivery today, I mean, it's the lifeblood on one hand of restaurants that are struggling beyond any time in history. It's up business, and, I was on a little bit of a back and forth, and it gets difficult because the vitriol lives on social media. And it was extremely difficult to just make a comment that, around regulation. I mean, you have the free market folks that just want to, and I believe in that. I also believe in the benefits of socialism. I think there's a way to find the middle here that starts with disclosure, transparency, and accountability. And that, we talk about that with our family members who may not know. They're pushing a button like everyone else. Do we know what is behind that button? Is it really important for us to do that? And if we don't know, should those companies be allowed to effectively manipulate us? Jaron Lanier said it very well. You cannot have, a relationship between two parties where the person that is connecting them is there with the sole purpose of manipulating them. And frankly, that is what sits behind many of those business models. And it's not about talking them down. It's about saying to them, how can you challenge yourself, right, to give back some of what was ill-gotten under Section 230 in a way that brings positive change to, all of us as consumers, allows businesses to operate more freely and be innovative and agile the way we know businesses can be to solve some of these big challenges for people that have the means, not just to give back, but to build and invest for the future in ways that seem insurmountable when you look at the power of some of these networks. Frankly, if you break a problem down into its pieces, how we were all taught to analyze things according to first principles, or the way some of the greatest schools in the world teach you to analyze a problem, extract all the quantifiable data, apply the formulas that you can to make the problem smaller, and then all of a sudden it's possible. Our model being decentralized and distributed is one that says each individual client has an ecosystem, and they need to protect it and increase the value that they provide to consumers. And if we solve that one at a time, well, creating a layer which is common to all of them, trust and security around data privacy, and the ability to use some of the formulas and some of the technology that we built to access, value that is otherwise locked up and inaccessible to consumers is really the path to the future. And while conversations like this may not resonate with everyone, or they may not have the time, to put into analyzing these things, as business leaders, as technologists, as humans, we have a duty to share our knowledge and our experiences with others, and do so in a way that gets enough attention with our government and with other businesses to band together and get us to a much better place. And, from times of struggle comes some of the greatest innovation in the world. We saw that in 2008. We saw that in 2000. Mr. Ruffalo himself, with the nuclear winter that followed 2000 into 2003 and beyond. And it became very, very difficult to raise capital in that era. John was able to see some of what was created in that era and invest in Shopify and others as, they reached their 10-year overnight success. And frankly, that's my message to entrepreneurs as well. Winning a contest is certainly an indication that something may happen good with that particular business, but it's a tireless effort, and one that many, many people in this world are predisposed to. They're creative. They know how to recognize a good idea. They have tenacity. They won't leave their post. Get together with them, share your ideas, share your experiences. Let's stop the K recovery from going any further. Let's engage, our fellow business people, our fellow technologists, our government, and let's talk about how collaboration can take a big step forward. It's all around us now. We're seeing it, day in and day out. Innovation from what were just 3 or 4 years ago called dinosaurs of retail that we would see disappear off the face of the planet are now as agile as I've seen any small business. And equally, small businesses with their value add can make their way up the food chain by using collaborative technology, as we've seen from Shopify. Those are trends to bet on. Those will create more good, sustainable jobs for people who can be retrained, for governments to get in behind those initiatives, and for all of us to have some hope, because while hope isn't a good strategy, there's so much goodness in this world that can be unlocked. There are so many opportunities that we can all band together on, that as far as I'm concerned, we have to take this very difficult time and the very dark moments that surround us today and try and turn them into something that lasts more than just the instant gratification that we get from pushing the button to have something delivered to our front step. That would be my word for the holidays.
Wow, it was very powerful, Peter. I even thought about a couple of other points, not going there because you left it on a tremendously high note, very well addressed, and your advice was absolutely fantastic in really what you've done. I recommend to people that they do actually, in fact, hear it and hear it again, because there's some really fantastic nuggets in there that you might miss if you just heard it once. And as Peter said, there's a lot here to chew and absorb, and then try to relate it in your environment. But it's very good advice. And to people, I would turn and say, hang tight. In January 21, when we do the summit, Peter is going to have a very important role there. And so if you have questions that you think didn't get addressed, I think tremendous amount got addressed, fire it in. We will make sure that we will deal with those things. Peter, I don't know how to thank you. It was really amazing, soul-searching, insightful stuff that you have put out there. And no wonder you had that success, because is the key part here is how you think. That's a pretty important message for people to understand, that you need to start doing that, and you will have success. People will have success. They need to start thinking the first principles, as you talk about, which is very important. Understand why you're doing this, what is the value, and then things change. Oh, that's fantastic. I really appreciate. Thank you for doing this session today, and wish you all the very best for the holiday season. And of course, we're going to work very closely with you, because you are a very important part of BIZTEK, and I look forward to doing more of this.
Thank you, Bashir, for your compliments. I can tell you that working in a technology business, you are blessed with having creative and determined minds all around you, sharing their experiences with you. And it reminds me of being at an award ceremony years ago. It was actually for Restaurateur of the Year. And I was with a friend who had founded a business that won an award, but the Restaurateur of the Year was David Eisenstadt at Kelsey's. And as he got to the microphone, I'll never forget what he said. He opened up saying, standing here feels like a turtle on a fence post. I don't know how I got here, but I know I didn't get here by myself. And I would say that epitomizes my experience, certainly over the years in technology, but elsewhere, being fortunate enough to be around some of Canada's greatest entrepreneurs and investors. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. It was fabulous.
All right, super. Well, thank you, Bashir, very much for having me on today. And I was a little bit nervous coming on today, because there are just so many things that we need to think about. But with your efforts and how you've pulled so many of us together over the last period of time with this initiative, I have great hope that comes from and as you correctly stated, those of us who don't necessarily know the answer, have experiences to share, some good, some not so good. And I hope we can do a lot more of that as we go forward. And this is an excellent platform for that to play out. And I look forward to what you have in store for us in 2021. All the best for the holidays, Bashir. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really, truly appreciate it. All the best.